Good evening and welcome to our October Parent Academy tonight. We actually have two Parent Academies in October in 2 weeks, October 27th. We have another Parent Academy done by UC Health. It's on concussion symptoms, effects, and treatment with Dr. Nick Piantonata and Dr. Ian Tolberg, who works with all of our athletic trainers, and the athletic trainers will be there as well. So that's 2 weeks from tonight, same time, same place. We'll be right here on Teams Live. Tonight, our topic is supporting families during COVID-19, helping parents and children deal with traumatic stress. This has certainly been a long 7 months, and I think we've all been under a heightened amount of stress. So we're looking forward to having Ms. Jessica Mars with us tonight. I'm going to introduce her in just a second. I do want to let you know that this presentation is being recorded tonight so that we can share with parents that perhaps couldn't attend tonight, as well as there will be a Q&A session. It will start around 10 after 7. Feel free to put your questions in the chat as we go, as Jessica presents to us. And we will be filtering those questions and we will announce them when we get to that time. So we are so happy to have Jessica Mars with us tonight. She has done several parent academies for us. She is a licensed clinical social worker with UC Health Memorial and is with the Behavioral Health Department. Jessica specializes in addiction medicine and the impact that trauma has on individuals. She has previously worked with adult and child victims of domestic violence and sexual assault, and has been an individual and group therapist working with children and their families and loved ones who were involved in the foster care system. Jessica has a strong desire to educate and foster growth and learning within her community, particularly around the topics of trauma, addiction, and violence against women and children. She firmly believes that many problematic life issues are a result of unresolved trauma and strives to help individuals find their own strength and their own voice in their healing. Jessica has worked with all ages and finds joy in helping the most vulnerable of our citizens. She is married, has 2 wonderful beagle pups. She likes to hike, take long walks by the river in Pueblo, where she lives, and also enjoys all the arts, music, theater, visual arts. So we will give her a warm ASD 20 welcome. Thank you, Jessica, for being with us.
Thank you, Maureen. I appreciate that warm introduction. I just ask that everyone grant us a little grace as we're going through this. There might be some snafus, but we're going to do the best that we can to make sure that you can hear everything. So we're going to start tonight with talking about the objectives for learning. We're going to define traumatic stress and how it relates to COVID-19. We're going to work on the identification of symptoms and maladaptive coping skills, and talk about resiliency for both parents and the child, as well as tools for success. We run into some snafus. It's not letting me advance. Oh, there we go. Okay, so let's define trauma. So trauma is a deeply distressing or disturbing experience, physical injury as defined by Merriam-Webster. However, according to the DSM-5, it is a traumatic stressor or any event or events that may cause or threaten death, serious injury, sexual violence to an individual, a close family member, or a close friend. One of my favorite definitions of it is that it's a single or repeated event or stressor that is extremely upsetting and at least temporarily overwhelms one's internal resources. People may find that that means a lot of things can induce trauma, and that's true because trauma is very individualized to the individual experiencing that repeated or single episode or stressor. And how they respond to that will determine on whether or not that is a traumatic experience for them. The word trauma comes from the Greek language and means wound, and it doesn't distinguish between physical or emotional wounds, which is very interesting because a lot of what we're encountering right now is emotional wounds, and we would definitely classify those as traumatic incidences. There's several different kinds of trauma. The first is acute. Usually these are episodes of car accidents or gunshot victims, things to that nature, a natural disaster, something that happens in a single incident rather than a prolonged incident. Chronic trauma is repeated prolonged trauma, such as domestic violence over the years, abuse over the years, war, and I would argue that what we're experiencing now is chronic trauma based off of the last 8 to 9 months of how our culture and society has had to adapt so quickly and with fear that we're all experiencing. Complex trauma is chronic interpersonal trauma, varied. It has multiple avenues of it. It can be early onset, it can happen in childhood, and it's often done by a trusted person. Not always, but definitely complex trauma is something we'll talk a little bit more later. So we're going to talk about a few numbers. I don't want us to get too caught up in the statistics, but it's important to understand that we're all experiencing trauma. So more than 2/3 of children report at least one traumatic event by the age of 16. This is pretty significant. So that means that we're already working with a pretty traumatized population in some respects. 1 in 4 high school students have been at least one physical fight. 1 in 5 high school students have been bullied in school. 1 in 6 experienced cyberbullying. 19% of injured and 12% of physically ill youth have PTSD, so post-traumatic stress disorder. And more than half of US families have been affected by some type of disaster. That's usually related to something such as hurricanes, losing a home to fire, which we've experienced in this community several times in the past 10 years. But obviously COVID-19 is also something that has affected all families in our society. And I think that's something to hold on to as we think about trauma and how it relates to COVID-19. 1 in 7 children will experience child abuse or neglect in the past year. And this is likely an underestimation, particularly now that schools were closed. We saw a huge decline in numbers of reporting when schools were not open, due to the fact that schools are usually a great place for kids to have those red flags identified. And teachers do a great job of sending that on to the proper authorities to make sure that those kids are trying to be taken care of. Rates of child abuse and neglect are 5 times higher for children and families with low socioeconomic status. So where you live, how much you make depends on the rate of abuse. That does not mean that people in higher economic statuses do not abuse their children or themselves. What that means is that typically we're seeing the higher numbers in those socioeconomic statuses, likely because their reporting is higher in those populations. So let's take a quick glance at the last 8 months. And I think we've all seen these memes where we have these beautiful people in January, and then as the months go by, we're looking worse and worse for wear. So I just thought that was a little funny because we have to have some levity when we're talking about trauma and COVID as well. If we don't have some humor, and some levity regarding that, it will eat us up and it will cause more post-traumatic stress for people. So this thing called COVID or SARS or Corona or the Rona, whatever you want to call it, but it's been at the center of heated debates in our society or culture, protests, memes, jokes, and a lot of fear. It's definitely changed how we view and experience the world around us. It's made us and forced us to adapt to new ways of living and interacting with each other. Before we would give each other hugs and, perhaps kisses and, things like that when we would see friends or family members. However, now we're encouraged to stay 6 feet away, not to shake hands. So all of our customs that were very normal for us have changed greatly. And so when we don't know, when there's not an end in sight, when we don't know when things will get normal again, it's hard to adapt, and it causes a lot of interpersonal dynamic problems as well as personal issues. So this is a lot of words. I don't want people to freak out, but I did create a little timeline. And I did not take every event that happened in every month. I just kind of summarized some of the big things. But while I go through these, I would like everyone to really consider what you were experiencing during these months, how you were feeling, what your children were doing, what your thoughts were. Maybe you started out thinking this isn't going to be a big deal. We're going to get through this. And then by April or May or June, you're thinking, what is going on? So in January was the first cases diagnosed in the United States, and that was in Washington State. The WHO declared it a public health emergency, and President Trump restricted travel to China, and from China to travel to the US. In February, cruise ships around the world were quarantined. Italy, France, and the Philippines and Iran saw huge increases in numbers of infected, and the United States declared its first death to COVID. However, we would later find out that that was the third death, that there was earlier deaths notated due to COVID. In March, the CDC lifted all restrictions on testing. President Trump declared a national emergency and increased some funding. Gatherings of 50 people or more were heavily discouraged and restricted. We were encouraged to keep it down to 10 or less. And the largest school district in the nation completely closed down, and that was in New York. Countries around the world implemented widespread lockdowns, and the United States led the world in confirmed cases of COVID-19 already in March. President Trump did sign a stimulus plan of $2 trillion, which is when we got our stimulus checks, some of us, and when people were starting to get laid off work. In April, by the second week, 10 million Americans were now unemployed, which is the highest number in history. More people had applied for unemployment than ever before. Airlines began to require face masks as well as other businesses, and many schools ended their academic year early or offered remote learning for families, and families had to work remotely at home as well. Businesses, schools, and other agencies had to adapt, and the global economy was predicted to contract by 3% rather than the expectation of a predicted growth of 3.3%. In May, Japan and Germany entered a recession, two of the largest global economies. USA death toll surpasses 100,000 people, the most in the world at that time, and large protests sparked fears of mass infections when we had the Equal Rights and Black Lives Matter protests due to police brutality issues. There was a lot of fear during that month, a lot of newscasting, a lot of things going on that were beyond everyone's control. So I just want to keep that in the back of your mind as we go through this presentation about that fear and how you were feeling at that time. June, remote areas around the world started seeing infection. One of the uncontacted tribes even had a infection. Southern US states see a drastic spike in numbers, largely due to them opening up very early, opening their beaches to encourage travel. The EU reopened their borders to several countries, but not to Brazil, the United States, or Russia. In July, the US deaths surpassed 130,000. President Trump sends formal notice of withdrawal from the WHO. More than 5 million Americans lose healthcare insurance. And South Korea publishes data that teens may spread COVID-19 as readily as adults, while younger children spread it at lower rates. In August, I think all the teachers online or people who work in the school districts will think we were worrying and stressing. Are we opening our doors? How's this going to look? Businesses, schools, employers are trying to figure out their next steps. What do we do? What does this look like? Again, a lot of unknown, a lot of things beyond our control, and no end in sight. Keeping that in mind, I want you to just think about what thoughts, feelings came up from you while reviewing that timeline. And when you think and spend time talking about COVID-19 with your children, what is that experience like? Does it cause anxiety in you? Do you see your children's anxiety increase as you talk about it, or they're watching the news with you? There's certainly a lot of funny memes. Obviously, I tried to include some of those things because we need to laugh, right? That's part of healing and part of coping. But it's been a very serious issue, and there's been lots of civil distress and unrest due to all of the issues beyond our control. And I also want you to remember that while it may have been difficult for you to cope with everything that was going on, think about your kids who don't have all of those coping skills built up as much as adults should at that point. They don't have the ability to get in their car and take a drive to exit a situation or gain some perspective. They really had to change how they operated on their day-to-day. So I just want you to keep that in mind. So how might COVID-19 be a traumatic stressor for children, teens, and families? So one of the most basic ways that this is the case is it has disrupted normal routines pervasively. So school, it's a huge routine. Kids know they go Monday through Friday. They know what time they have to be here. It's very structured. Most children have before or after school activities. They have free time with kids, and all of these things have been greatly disrupted. They are not on their normal routines. They weren't able to go to school. They weren't able to engage in summer sports or activities. They weren't able to graduate normally if they were in school last year. And so keeping that in mind, that is a trauma. That is a disruption of your normal routine in a pervasive way. It has changed our perceived level of physical and emotional safety. So when we are constantly being warned or told that if you touch someone or they sneeze on you or they cough on you or you hug them or you have exposure to them that you might die due to this illness, that incites fear. Not being sure who is safe to be around, who to believe. You're getting conflicting information from the news outlets and family members and everyone involved. New family stressors, families trying to figure out, how do I go to work, provide daycare, interact with my children, make sure they feel safe. All of those things combined create a huge perceived level of emotional unsafeness. It has also altered how we view others and our relationships with others. Like I said before, we're a very interactive culture. We like to touch each other. We like to hug. Our handshake has been around for eons. It's probably never going to go away. The fist bump, all of the ways that we interact with each other. And so what the problem with that is that when we alter those views, for a child who's still learning what that looks like and still developing their brain and their neural pathways for development and with touch and interaction, it interrupts that cycle for them. It creates a sense of not knowing, not being secure in themselves, not being sure what to do. And if their parent is also not sure, because again, none of us are sure of anything at this point with COVID, you may not be able to instruct your child on what to do or how to behave or who's safe and who's not, because we too are getting conflicting information. Obviously, pervasive media coverage that incites fear, repeated images of fear-inducing situations or facts. This includes, all of the multitude of cultural issues we have going on alongside COVID. We're constantly being inundated with information from news outlets, Facebook, all of the social media outlets, everything. So kids are seeing this, even if they're not sitting in the house watching news with their family, they're seeing these images and these ideas being regurgitated through their social media outlets as well. In some families, COVID-19 has exacerbated adult use of addictive substances, domestic violence, violence towards children, teens, and has prompted divorce due to stress. The divorce rate has skyrocketed exponentially in the last 4 to 5 months. And one of the biggest things that sits with me about how this has impacted our children, teens, and families is the missed milestones. So, going back to last spring when everyone was supposed to graduate and move forward in their educational careers, they may have missed out on a lot of things. A lot of people that were in sports and relying on scholarships or being seen in their sporting events weren't able to finish their sports year. They weren't able to go to prom, graduation, big events, weddings, funerals, all the things that we normally consider part of who we are, how we interact with each other, our milestones of development through school have been greatly impacted. So some common behaviors in trauma in adolescents and adults And this is definitely not an all extensive, all inclusive list. This is just some of them, because we're all individuals. We all have our own perceptions. We all have our own family dynamics. But substance abuse is being used to cope with hyperarousal and re-experiencing of the stressor. So what that means is we are using substances at greater levels at this point to numb our hyperarousal and that stressor of not knowing, the fear, the anxiety that everyone's feeling. So parents are drinking more and they're home with their kids more, which also can possibly lead to more abuse or ill-tempered toward their kids. Children are also using substances. Indiscriminate and unsafe sexual behavior, cutting, self-mutilation, other disfiguring tactics. We've seen an increase of kids coming in, burning themselves, and doing, disfiguring things to their bodies in a way to, again, cope with that hyperarousal and re-experiencing of the stressor, which is the anxiety. Suicidal ideations, attempt of death by suicide, engaging in high-risk behaviors on characteristics of them prior to the stressor. So big changes, many of you may have noticed that your kids maybe who were extroverted have a more difficult time with this COVID-19 because they're used to being out, interacting with their social groups, doing their activities, their after-school things, whereas kids who are more introverted may not have had as big of an adaptation to that process. There could be strong feelings of hopelessness, anger, anxiety, shame, guilt. Those can all exist. I should have known how to online school my kid better, or I should have known how to log on to that so my mom wasn't stressed out, right? Guilt, shame, they follow with these incidences. Overreaction to minor incidents or irritations. I know as a parent, my parents, anytime they were more stressed, you could tell because the minor things that normally wouldn't bother them, they would have a stronger reaction to. Repetitively thinking about traumatic event and talking about it. So that COVID-19 has been a topic of discussion since February. I don't think there's been one event I've been at, one interaction, one conversation that I've had with people since that time that did not include the topic of COVID-19 and where are we going? What does this mean for us? Again, the unknown. Trauma, it affects our eating and sleep patterns. We may get too much sleep, eat too much, we may not get enough. It also causes us to withdraw from our family, our friends, our important events, choosing to avoid things we might normally do, isolating ourselves, wanting to spend more time alone. Obviously, there's other behaviors, so I would like you to think about how, in context, you can think about your own family, the changes that you've all experienced, and maybe kind of identify some changes in your own children's behaviors that may be a trauma response. Behind anger, there's usually some other feeling, right? Anger is kind of what we are known as a secondary emotion, and that's not always, but oftentimes anger is a easily identified feeling, right? We're taught what anger is at a very young age, but underneath anger is often fear, depression, pain, sadness. So I really liked this image because it really shows that while on the outside we may be expressing anger, the children might be having outbursts. They might be saying, I'm not doing homeschooling and throwing their stuff, right? But underneath that is a lot of fear, a lot of confusion, anxiety, maybe feeling like they don't know if mom knows how to teach them or their dad knows how to teach them. And that makes them worry, just like it makes you worry. So I want us to think about the neurobiology of trauma and what happens in our bodies and our brains. And I want to use the example of a nurse. Okay, I work with nurses and they're amazingly strong people. But what happens is some of them are single moms and parents, and they work 12 hours, 13-hour shifts. And, I work with a coworker and she's constantly posting on Facebook, I did not sign up to be a teacher, right? She signed up to be a nurse. That's what she wants to do. But when she gets home at the end of her shift, she has to go and homeschool her kiddo. And that was at the end of last year and the beginning of this year. I think they're finally in classes now, but that was definitely part of their new routine. And so what would happen is she said, I noticed that as soon as I would start getting off work, my nervous system would start activating. I'd start getting anxious. I'd be short and curt with my employees. I just noticed that I just was feeling dread going home. And so that's the stressor, right? She was doing the fight or flight. It's like, I want to run away from this. I don't want to do that. Her nervous system was acting up, and she was responding to the stressor of having to go home and do this homeschooling after she had already worked her 13-hour shift. And so she went home, and what happens? Her kid mirrors that behavior. They see that anxiety. Some kids may internalize that and think, well, what did I do? What can I do to help mom feel better? And then their anxiety increases. So their sympathetic nervous system is activated. And then they sit down at the table thinking they're going to be productive with homework while their sympathetic nervous system is activated and they're on that fight or flight response. And we think we're going to be productive when we sit down and we get to that math problem and mom does it a certain way, but the kid was told she has to do it another way. And then they have a conflict, right? And so what happens is then during that trauma, reciprocal activity in the parasympathetic nervous system activates, opiates and other chemicals are released into our brain, our non-essential systems are turned down, and then we might freeze. Mom might give up and say, I don't know how to do it, call your friend and see if they know. Or the kid might throw their pencil and say, you're dumb, mom, that's not how you do it. I know those fights happen, don't deny them, we all know they happen, right? And so I think it's important to understand that's part of that trauma response. And then afterwards, once you maybe called a friend or mom walked away and cooled her jets and kiddo had a time to have, a little time out for themselves, they might come back together and kiddo might crawl into mom's lap and say, I'm sorry, this is hard. And mom says, it's hard for me too. And their frontal lobe activity resumes. They may shake, they may cry, but they're bonding together, which isn't always a good thing because that's what we call a trauma bond. But their body is recalibrating. So they're getting back to what they're normally knowing. But that is the process of a trauma in the example of homework. And I know homework shouldn't be a trauma, but when we're dealing with everything else that we're dealing with, our bodies go through the same thing and we don't know how to suss that out. We don't know how to say, this isn't a car accident or this isn't me being shot at with a gun. This shouldn't be traumatic. That's not how our brains and our nervous systems work. What happens is our nervous systems activate, and that tells our brains and it releases the chemicals. And so we have a hard time dealing with those kind of things. So again, the brain-body response. So when we have a threat, so whether that threat is a perceived physical threat or an emotional threat, our adrenaline and cortisol is released into our body, our heart rate and breath increases, blood pumps to our muscles, digestion stops, and many of us may have what we call anxiety attacks. We may have a hard time, we may hyperventilate, we may have increased shaking, our fingers and hands get cold, things like that. And those are all very normal responses to stressors to our bodies. It's important to note, however, that there's a lot of different potential outcomes, and these are not just two of them, or these are just two of them. These are not the only results, but if it's a single event, you have good support, very little trauma prior to the event, you're usually going to walk away from that traumatic incident feeling okay. You might need to do some decompression, you may need to vent and talk with a friend or a therapist a few times, but in most cases, if you have those things in place, it's a single event, you're going to come out looking pretty good. Now, if you're young, developmentally vulnerable, if you have inadequate support, or if the trauma is multiple or prolonged, such as what we're experiencing as a culture right now, then we're going to be left with many intense responses. We're going to be chronically activating our survival response, and it's going to potentially lead to PTSD. And so for an example of all of that is we have experienced COVID with no outcome yet, no consistent information yet really, for about 8-9 months now. And we're also experiencing cultural shifts and changes. We're facing unemployment at record rates. We're facing businesses being shut down, families going from a 2 income to possibly 0 income or 1 income, no childcare options. So when you combine all of these things, it's what we call a multiple trauma, and it's been prolonged. And so it's reasonable to understand that children and the adults are going to have a traumatic response to these things. So now that we've talked about trauma a little bit, let's talk about what we can do about it, because we certainly don't want to ignore the fact that, you know, we can overcome trauma. So let's talk about resiliency a little bit. It's the capacity to recover quickly from difficulties, the ability of a substance or object to spring back, so elasticity, to come back to how you're supposed to be. The developing brain has all of these qualities of resiliency until it doesn't. And so we have to be very careful with ourselves and our children. If we don't have good interventions, and if we just allow people to continue to be inundated with stress with no support, then our ability to have resiliency and bounce back lessens, okay? It decreases. So what helps us build it is having a safe, reliable, stable person in their camp. This does not always have to be a parent. It can be a teacher. It can be a counselor. It can be a clergy person, church person, whoever is in your camp that you can go to, that you feel safe with, that resonates with you, and that you don't feel threatened by. Helping kids know themselves. So identifying their own feelings, helping them understand what their interests are, what they like, what they don't like, giving them permission to tell people, including adults, no. Those are huge things. Using mistakes as teaching moments, not shaming moments. As a culture, we like to shame, which is too bad. We do it even with our pets, right? We put the little signs over their necks and the pet says, I ate the couch, you know, and we're shaming our dogs. Thankfully, they're not like humans, and we can't necessarily know if they feel that internalized shame, but children certainly do when we do those behaviors to them. So instead of shaming, we have to use mistakes as teaching moments for them. The same goes for adults, right? Many of you parents who have had to fumble through a lot of these, you know, new technology things for schools and for your work. And I was laughing with the gals here today. We had to take an hour setting this up, right? And it was stressful. I was like, well, this is trauma in itself, because we've had to learn to adapt so much and so quickly and learn new skills. And so if we shame each other in regards to that, or shame ourselves, then we internalize that and we lessen our ability to be resilient when we experience new traumas. We also want to help our kids develop mindfulness and self-awareness. And so walking through the world, being aware of their space in that world, how they impact their world, and how the world impacts them. So we want to use a whole brain approach to processing and healing after trauma. We want to connect and then redirect. Okay, so that when a kid or a parent or anyone is upset and in that immediate moment of not feeling stable or good about where they're at emotionally or physically, we have to give them the space to connect with that and connect to a safety net first. And feel grounded in some ways before we redirect their behavior or whatever it is we need to redirect. We need to be present with kids. They need to feel safe, heard, and cared for. So that's that right brain to right brain connection. And we'll talk a little bit more about mirror neurons as well. Logic is not effective until you attune to emotional needs. They need to feel felt. Okay, so logic is great. I'm all for teaching kids critical thinking. We need to have logic in how we interact, but we absolutely cannot ignore that if we don't acknowledge and deal with the emotional needs first, logic won't make sense and it won't be logical. So we have to deal with those emotions, help them compartmentalize that, deal with that, acknowledge it, be okay with it, and then we can move on to more of those critical thinking skills. We need to redirect through planning and discussion. So just like us, right? We know what our day is going to look like at work a lot of times. We have it planned out, we have it scheduled, we have meetings to discuss things. Children appreciate those same things. I think sometimes parents take for granted that they can just say, get your shoes on, let's go, we're leaving in 2 minutes, right? Kiddo thinks, well, that automatically actually gets their parasympathetic and sympathetic nervous system activated, because they're thinking, well, what are we doing? Where are we going? I didn't have time to do this. What do I do with what I'm doing right now? And all of these things kind of go through their head. And so when we sit down as families and we have discussions and we plan together, then we're redirecting, we're connecting, and we're helping them create structure and a platform that they can lean on when they need to. So name it to tame it. Telling about the event or stressor through storytelling can assist them in integrating how they're reacting to their emotions and their memories. So we know what our emotions are and how to label them as adults because we were taught that throughout the years, whether that was by our families, our teachers, our community members, or through therapy. You know, some adults don't learn those skills until they are adults, and that's okay. But one of the things that we have to do is we have to teach our kids what they're experiencing. So when a kiddo comes home and they throw their book bag on the floor and they stomp through the house and they jerk open the refrigerator door and they slam it back down, what do you think they're experiencing? We could easily say, don't you dare slam our cupboards, don't you dare slam the refrigerator door, right? And kind of get on them about that. Instead, it might be more helpful to say, hey, it looks like you had a really bad day. You're stomping around, you're slamming things. What happened to you, right? And helping them understand why they're doing that, help them see that they're doing that. They may not realize they're slamming the doors. They may not realize they're stomping through the house because they're so caught up in their emotional brain. And so we have to help them understand what they're doing, what their behavior is, so that they can tame that a little bit. And then we need to help them probe beyond the surface of what they may understand. Engage them rather than enrage them, right? Kids are very smart, they're very adaptive, and they're very resilient. And so we need to engage them in learning processes and not try to shelter them from everything, because in our world today, when they're online more than they're in person connecting with people, we have to understand that they're going to run across things that are going to engage them, whether we're there or not. And so if parents are not having these discussions and having these probing discussions, conversations with them, then the children are going to gain a different understanding than perhaps the parent wants them to. So some helpful tips and strategies to use with your children and teenagers and with other adults, because that never goes away, is to model deep breathing and slow intentional breathing when talking with them. So what does that mean? That means that you have to be regulated before you interact. It means that if you're so upset that you can't slow your breathing, if you can't take a deep breath, then maybe right now is not the time to talk with kiddo about the behavior, about what's going on. We have to be able to regulate ourselves. It doesn't mean that you can't show anger or frustration or that something makes you feel upset to your kids, because they need to see that that is a feeling you experience. But we definitely, if we want to treat it as a learning moment, we have to model that deep breathing. Mirror neurons. So these are beautiful, beautiful things. So people will mirror the behavioral patterns of someone they feel connected to. So think about a conversation that you've had with a friend at coffee. If they lean in and they put their hand like this, you may also. If they pick up their coffee and take a drink, you may also. And that's mirroring their interactions because you feel connected with them. It's something every human being does, particularly in our culture. And so what that means is that if you come into a conversation with kiddo dysregulated, angry, upset, they're going to mirror that and they're going to mimic that right back to you, or they're going to respond in another way, such as fear, going inward, things that we don't want because it closes them off to discussions. We need to help them develop deeper understanding and how to ask quality questions without judgment of them. So making sure to probe of, you don't want to hang out with Sally anymore. Can you tell me what happened? Like, you used to be such good friends, things like that. No judgment there, but just what happened. I'm interested in knowing what changed. I'm interested in knowing what is different for you, without saying, well, you really should like Sally. She's a good person and her family is our friends, right? So there's a difference in how we approach those things. So talking while engaging in a physical activity such as a game, walking, basketball, those things are really helpful, especially with teens. Kids don't like to engage a lot of time with the direct eye contact. If you sit next to them or play with them, you're going to get a world of information, I promise. As a therapist, that's one of our go-to skills is we get on the floor and we interact with the kids in our play therapy sessions. And through their play, they tell us all kinds of things that are going on in their world. And it helps us identify internal feelings that maybe they can't put words to in a one-to-one direct eye contact conversation. It's very intimidating. A lot of adults don't even like to do that. So remembering that when you're interacting with your kids can be a helpful tip. Take their feelings seriously. Don't mock them. Everyone's feelings are okay, and people should have permission to have them. The behaviors that result from feelings, however, cannot be okay, and those are the teaching opportunities that we have. But when we mock feelings that kids or teens have, it really shuts that down. It forces them to not feel comfortable in sharing those things with you anymore. And particularly teens, it takes a lot for them to continue to open up with their parents oftentimes because they're more peer related and they're focusing more on what their peers' opinions are. And so if they say, I love him, you know, and dad says, you're too young to love, you don't even know what that is, right? Mocking that. Then that is something that they may not continue to share with dad because that may incite a feeling of shame for that feeling, or that dad isn't validating that, and make them feel bad about that. An emotion comes and goes on average about 90 seconds. So the time that I've been talking to you, you've had a million emotions, right? Frustration, irritation, aha moments, whatever it might be. So making sure that you understand and teach your kids that emotions are fleeting. They're important to understand, identify, label, and we have to take them seriously, but they do change. And that's particularly important with kids who are contemplating suicide, and helping them understand that while they may feel that right now, if they reach out for support, it might change pretty quickly for them. And so having those conversations with your kids about emotions. Remember, they may not be able to recognize their own feelings, helping them label and identify that. Listening to what they're not saying or doing. And that's really good to do when you're doing interactive activities with them. So when you're playing games, when you're playing video games or a basketball game or a board game or whatever it is you do as a family, what are they doing and what's their behavior and how are they interacting with others rather than what they're saying. Those can be big indicators of things that are red flags for parents. But the most important thing is to listen and connect. Be present. You know, don't be on your phone when you're sitting down having a conversation with your kid. You know, don't worry about what Joe Smo down the street is doing when you're trying to redirect a behavior. You have to be very present and mindful in the moment with your kiddo. Otherwise, they see that, they feel that, and it feels disingenuous to them, and they're not going to connect to you on the level that you'd like them to. So now I want to talk about a little bit about the window of tolerance. I really like that the picture we have here because there's this great, beautiful, colorful place in between the shutdown and the blow up. And that's where learning and listening happens. The problem, particularly with COVID-19 and ongoing stress in a society or culture that we've been experiencing, it reduces our capacity for that in-between space. So that gets shorter and smaller. That little rainbow is going to get littler and littler the more stress that we have, because it reduces our capacity for change, to regulate our emotions. And so on one end, we may have kids shutting down, not feeling heard, not feeling desired, wanted, understood, feeling shut away from everyone, alone, versus the blow up, the externalized feelings that kids have. So those are the kiddos that might respond more with tears or anger or destroying things, or, you know, acting out when they've never acted out before, calling names, things like that. So some good tips to help you with that window of tolerance is, again, to make sure that you yourself is regulated before you talk to your child. Make sure that you're in that middle area where you're not close to shutting down, you're not close to blowing up, your stress is as minimal as it can be in that moment, and that your emotions are as regulated as possible. And then make sure the kiddo has the same ability to do that. Do they feel safe? Are they in a safe place physically and emotionally, before you address concerns? And then giving each other support when needed and asking yourself, is this a battle I really want to take up right now? Is it worth me being so upset that we didn't get this math homework done? Because I guarantee you it's not, okay? Your relationship with your family and your kids should always come first, not life things like homework or getting to soccer practice on time when that starts up again, things like that. You don't have to pick up those battles all the time. And so maybe learning new ways to address that as a parent. All right, so creating a new space. Like I said earlier, having a routine is really important. Schools have always provided that for families, and that's one of the beautiful things about schools. But unfortunately, that looks different now, and it looked different throughout the summer, and it looked different in the spring. And so we have to adapt. We have to create new kinds of routines. So for working families that may be doing homeschooling now, having a set time that you go to work, and then that you come home and do, or if you're working from home, that you do homework and schoolwork with your kids. Having that set and as routine as possible is really important. If you've had family nights where you used to go out once a week, adapt and do something fun at home, a date night with your kids, whatever that might look like. You have to kind of look at what your normal routine used to be and what was important to you, what you valued as a family system, and then see how can I creatively adapt and make that something that we can do now. It's just going to look a little different. Try to encourage discussion about things they hear on TV, the internet, from other family and friends. Oftentimes, they're going to get mixed messages. We know if we log into any news outlet, depending on your orientation politically, you're going to get different information. The internet's the same way. Peers are going to be telling different things than maybe more healthy or more adept adults might. And so we need to understand that if we don't have those conversations with our kids about those things, then they are wrestling with trying to figure out, what should I listen to? What does make sense? And then oftentimes what they're going to do is make impulsive decisions based off of those 90 seconds of feelings that they're experiencing that leads them maybe to a bad choice or a poor choice, or something that's not as healthy for them. But again, if you help them process that, you have a discussion and you're non-judgmental, it's extremely helpful. Don't try to be super mom or dad. Nobody is. If you don't know, it's okay. Just tell your kid, I don't know, and I'll find out for you. And then do your best to find out. Follow up with them. They do remember when you make promises like that. And when you don't follow up and when you don't find out the information, they're going to fill in their own blanks. And a lot of times that's with misinformation or information that's not all there. And so you really need to make sure that if you do promise you're going to find out, that you follow up with your kiddos. And then parent and educators are taking on new roles they've never had to before. Teachers did not sign up to be online teachers. They wanted to be in the classroom interacting with their children, right? And the administrators here, they did not sign up to learn how to use Microsoft, Outlook and all these things that we've had to adapt to. They've had to change a lot of things about how we operate. And so we need to be gentle with ourselves. Parents, again, you aren't teachers, or many of you are not teachers. You didn't sign up for that either. And so being faced with having to possibly do that again for a whole year is a very scary, nerve-wracking, anxiety-inducing idea. So be kind to ourselves, be kind to others, and then you have to make sure that when you're feeling overwhelmed, that you're addressing your self-care before you get to that feeling of burnout. Okay, so whatever that looks like, there's several examples up on the board right now of types of self-care, But the biggest thing is that you have to identify what fills me up, what makes me feel like I have the energy to take on this next stressor, and where am I going to keep getting that from? And it doesn't always look the same for everyone. My friend likes to clean. They're crazy, right? That would not be self-care for me. But for me, it's definitely being alone, being able to process, being able to journal. Things like that helps me understand where I'm at better. And so you have to identify that. And it might be fun for families to sit down and talk about, what does this look like for us? How do we take care of each other and ourselves? And when mom says this means mom needs this, right? And setting some of those new boundaries in the home, since everyone is at home with each other so much. So I want to talk a little bit also about COVID-19 personal preparedness, right? We've learned a lot about how to, respond to things. We have to wash our hands. One week masks are great, the next week they're not so great, the next week they're back again. So a lot of mixed messages. But what we want to focus on when we're dealing with things that are unknown, outside of our control, and that don't have an end in sight, is trying to focus on how can we be prepared as possible, what are the things I can control, and what are the things that I need to let go of that I can't control. So again, these are family activities that you can engage your kids in. If your kids know that you have a plan in place, that creates a feeling of structure and of safety for them. It helps them feel like the adults in their lives have the skills to get them through this. Now, as the adults, we might say, but I don't have the skills, right? Or I'm scared, I don't have the skills. And that's okay. You kind of have to fake it before you make it sometimes. You also have to be willing to not let your ego or pride interfere with your parenting, and reach out for your supports, whether that's to your school, your churches, your boss, your friends, your spouse, whoever it might be. But you have to be able and willing to reach out when you don't know, and help create that idea of safety for yourself as well. So some of the things, because I work at a hospital, I'd be remiss to not mention it, but obviously we want to encourage all of our families to continue to practice proper hand hygiene, practice proper social distancing, make sure that your home and work environment is clean as possible, create a new routine for yourself. But one of the biggest things that UC Health's behavioral health department is really focusing on with our own staff members and our patients is understanding what is within your control, what's not, and trying to be as prepared as possible for things. So even the simplest things of how are we going to get groceries now? Because packing up 4 or 5 kids, putting them in a cart, having to deal with masks, having to deal with people in the store yelling at you for wearing a mask or not yelling at you for wearing a mask, for not wearing a mask, will be another stressor. So what can we change? What can we adapt? Can we order groceries online? Can we have it delivered to our home? Same thing for medications, and many families have already got here and done these things, but a lot of families also haven't, or they haven't known how to do those things. So again, I encourage you to reach out to your supports to try to figure out, what are you and your family's doing? When this comes up, what are some ideas? Because this is a new thing for us and I've never done this before. And other parents can be a great support system for that. Some self-care and mental health tips for kids. Kids need to be able to have free play, okay? They need to be able to set aside time for low stress or solo activities. They need to be recognize toxic stress events. A lot of kids don't recognize stress or what's toxic. And so it's up to the adults in their lives to help them identify that. Whereas, a child might experience something, let's just say they're downtown and they seeing somebody act out in the homeless population, let's say. They may say that's funny, or they may laugh, or they may say, oh, that guy's being funny, why is he acting that way? Not understanding that maybe that person has a mental health disorder, isn't being safe with their body right now, could be impulsive, and that they just need to be aware that maybe isn't a very good environment for the kiddo to be in right now. So it's up to us as adults to help them understand those things. We also want to cultivate interests and hobbies, but not inundate them with it. We want to give them the leeway to see what they're interested in, and help them grow and foster those things. But when we keep our kids so busy that they're up from 5 a.m. and they're not down till 10 p.m., that gives them no time for reflection. It doesn't give them time to implement self-care plans, to do those introspective activities that kids need to do, and to have some quiet and peaceful time. We keep our kids very busy nowadays, and that's not always a good thing. So, trauma responses for kids, parents, and educators in the classrooms. Trauma can look like executive function deficits. So, inhibiting the ability for the child to develop skills and brain function needed to plan, organize, and solve problems. That trauma impacts that part of our brain. And so when we're asking our kiddo to lay out a project or complete something, it becomes extremely difficult for them to do that when they've been experiencing trauma and when they don't have a feeling of safety. You may see kids acting out aggressively in the classroom. You may get phone calls at home as a parent from a teacher or educator saying, you know, this isn't common for kiddo. I know this, but this is what they're doing. And this is also a trauma response. Again, that's that acting out of anger. And that's time to kind of try to help that kiddo learn some new coping skills, learn to identify their feelings, and perhaps get them engaged in some counseling services. Anxiety is huge in our society. I think it's one of our social plagues, but trauma definitely exacerbates it and makes it worse. Anxiety, I would say, is one of the leading causes for admission to our hospital for mental health reasons right now, and it's permeated everywhere. I have anxiety now. I was never an anxious person, and lately I've noticed my anxiety creeping up exponentially. And so you have to really start taking care of that, addressing that, and helping your kiddo identify those signs and symptoms of anxiety. And some of those things can be seeing them wring their fingers more. They may do skin picking. They may chew on their lips or their inside their cheeks. Those are all outward expressions of anxiety. Inward expressions may be that they're closed off, that they're not taking care of their hygiene, that they sit in a ball in the chair and don't move all day. You know, those are all anxiety responses. You also may encounter some language deficits. There can be some regression, particularly with younger kids. When I'm stressed out, I have a hard time word finding. It's one of the most frustrating things for me when I am in a place of high stress at work and I know my stuff, I know what I'm talking about, but dang it, that word won't come, and it makes me feel even more inept, and then I get more anxious and more frustrated, and my language completely shuts down. And so what is best for me in those instances is I have to step away. I have to say, you know what, I just need to take a few minutes, go take a walk, regather myself, drink some water, take some deep breaths, so that I can reacquire some of those some of those words. And then they're going to be easily distracted. Trauma, anxiety, all of those things distract us, and it makes it hard to focus on one singular thing. And so you're going to see kids that maybe are engaging for a few minutes and then easily distracted with something else, whereas before they weren't that way. So again, I want to talk about the kids' need for free and non-structured playtime throughout the day. It will foster independence, ability to adapt. It fosters critical thinking skills and will increase their creativity and resilience. What I mean by unstructured play is not a play date. It's not taking them to an activity that they have to do a specific thing like painting with a twist, right? That's fun. You should do those things with your family, but it is not unstructured. That is structured. Kids need the ability to run outside and use their imagination and play. And if we don't allow that, it does impede their ability to adapt and to develop critical thinking skills and creativity. Parents and educators also need free time and unstructured playtime. We need to be able to not have a schedule all the time and to say, I'm going to go with Sally Joe and we're going to go do this, right? And without having to worry about what that'll look like. If we take care of ourselves as parents and educators, we're more regulated, we're rested, and we allow ourselves that unstructured playtime, we'll be more equipped to deal with tough situations with our kids. And then kids need to see that their adults can handle what is happening for the most part. Again, this does not mean as parents that you have to have all the answers. That is certainly not what I'm saying. I do not want to put additional stress on you. But as parents, it is our responsibility to help kids know what is theirs and what is ours as adults to deal with. And the kid needs to understand that what's the parent's stuff to deal with, that the parent can deal with it properly and safely and get that child through that. And so sometimes that means that we share information with our kids about what's going on, and sometimes that means that we don't share everything with them and that we have to let them kind of wonder a little bit, but that's okay. They're going to ask questions, and you should have conversations with them, but not all information is appropriate. So you have to be very mindful of where they're at developmentally, what their age is, and what your family values are. You know, what do you feel is appropriate for them to know versus what they might be appropriate when they're 15 versus 10, things like that. So the following resources are a list for you. These are not all inclusive, but these are definitely some good websites to go on to. And the books, I highlighted and bolded the books that I feel would be particularly interesting or helpful for parents during this time. I recently bought this book and I've read it a couple times, but it is When the World Feels Like a Scary Place, Essential Conversations for Anxious Parents and Worried Kids by Abigail Gurwitz. And it's the last one down on the list. It has a specific chapter already for COVID-19 responses, and it has scripted conversations that you can try to have or practice with your spouse or that you can have with your kiddo, and it gives you tips and ideas. I found it very helpful when I was reading more about this topic and how it's impacting our children. But bottom line is that we have to connect. We have to make sure that we're not disconnecting from our kids because of our own trauma and stress. We have to stay connected to them. We have to build new connections. We have to foster a environment of safety and emotional well-being, and helping our kids understand and normalize for them that this is a scary time for everybody, that it's caused anxiety in everybody, and that that's okay that they feel that way, but we have to also work on relieving that anxiety and that stress. And that means we have an opportunity to build new skills, new coping strategies, and work on those things together as a family. That is the end of my actual presentation. So I think that leaves us some good time for some questions if we have some out there.
Absolutely. Well, we have a few questions right now in the chat box. Jessica, one of them is, what if all that you recommended does not work, where you can see all the red flags, try talking and being there, but are told that the only way to help is for us to let them be, that they don't want to talk, don't want to help, don't want any help, when emotions are all over the place and they just push and blame?
That's not an uncommon response, because what that tells me, I don't know the age of that kiddo, I would assume they're preteen probably, is that they don't know what they're feeling themselves. And so asking to talk with them about what they're feeling is confusing, and that causes more stress. So my suggestion might be, and again, these are just suggestions, I don't have all the answers, is you can observe their behaviors, the things they're not saying. And when they come in, or when they're acting a certain way, or their body language says something to you, say, you know, it looks like maybe you're feeling, you know, really sad today. And I see that because, you know, you're wrapped up in your blanket and you're not making eye contact with anyone, and you've been watching sad movies all day. And I'm really worried about that feeling for you. And when you're ready to talk about it, I want you to know that I'm here. It's okay to leave our kids alone when they ask for that and when they need that, but we don't want to do that too much, because what that does is it allows them to continue to isolate, and it allows them to internalize their feelings of distress. So what I would also suggest is that maybe as a parent you have to say, maybe I can't help maybe I do need to take my kiddo to therapy. Maybe they need a third party to help them suss out what they're experiencing. And then maybe I can join them in a therapy session, or maybe my child would feel more secure once they've gained some of these new skills or talk to somebody else about it, to talk to me about it. Try not to get your feelings hurt by that. Because we all need somebody outside of our own support sometimes to vent to talk with, to run things by, and a therapist is a really good person to do that with.
So just so you know, they did comment that it was a freshman in high school that was struggling, a teen.
That is a very typical age for that behavior. Again, they are less parent-oriented at that age. They're more peer-oriented. And so having a third party is actually a really good idea for that age, because they're going to be more like, I loved getting teen therapy clients because the parents would say, they're not talking to me at all. And they'd come in and I couldn't get them to shut up. I mean, they talked the whole session, and that was great. We'd have to then, structure it a little bit more as I got to know the child, or the teen. But what happened over time is that once they realized that they could deal with some of their feelings, they felt more comfortable putting it out there to their parents as well.
So next question. Thank you, Jessica. You mentioned earlier the media coverage and scary images that kids might see via the media. Would you suggest avoiding the news until the kids aren't around instead, or keeping them informed and absorbing the information with their parents?
That's a great question. And there is a myriad of information coming out in new articles about media and how it's impacting us. There's a lot of evidence to support that we need to reduce the amount that our kids are absorbing. And it also depends on their age. Now, if I have a teenager or preteen who has thus far had zero trauma or very minimal trauma, that we've had a very close relationship with, they have positive peer relationships, they're involved in extracurricular activities, then I would say it's okay to let them absorb news and information, but you also have to talk to them about it, because again, they're going to interpret it in their own way, and we need to make sure that that way is a healthy way. If they're younger and haven't created those structures yet, or been having opportunities to do those, haven't gained those coping skills, don't have the emotional acuity yet, I would suggest that you highly reduce the amount of news and social media that they're getting access to. Again, that's just my suggestion, and that's based off of understanding that if we don't have the time as parents to sit with them throughout those interactions with the news, or a distressing story on Facebook that they might read, or an image, and they're left in their own world to interpret that, that can create a very big feeling of anxiety and fear. And so if you are a parent that has the time and the energy and the resources to sit down and dissect those things and make sure that the kids have their questions answered, then I certainly think it's appropriate for them to understand what's going on in the world around them, and to watch those things. But if you're a parent who maybe isn't sure yourself, is experiencing your own anxieties, is experiencing confusion about things, that you maybe wouldn't be able to have those structured conversations as well yet, I would suggest that you reach out to your supports, you seek your own counseling to help you with that issue, and that you reduce the amount your child is watching.
So next question. Do you have ideas of something we can do to help alleviate stress for our teachers as they are dealing with our kiddos all day? For those of us who have gone to the hybrid option, the dynamic has shifted from parents having kids at home to in class with the teachers.
Yeah, that's also a great question. Like I said, we're all adapting to new ways of functioning in our roles that are completely alien and foreign to us. And so I think the best thing that you can do for our teachers to support them is give them grace. If they get short, or they don't respond to your email right away, or whatever that might look like, give them some latitude. Don't reach out in anger. regulate your own emotions first before having interactions. If you feel they've been inappropriate or they're stressed out to the point where it's impacting your learning environment for your kiddo. They are under a great amount of stress. They're teaching completely different now. They don't have the same tools and things that they've had in the classroom, and not being able to have that student right there in front of them is a huge shift. They're also dealing with their own family stressors. They have their own children. They have their own job stressors. Maybe their husband or their wife lost their job and they're now down to one income. Those are all things that are also happening to them. So just like I recommended for our parents, teachers need to do a good job of reaching out to their support. So their administrative staff, their decision makers at their school districts, I need this, and advocating for themselves. And parents need to support that. And you can do that by voting certain ways. You can do that by being involved and going to events and online learning things. You can do that by making your voice heard to the administration if there's ongoing problems or it feels like the teachers aren't getting their needs met. So those are all ways in which you could support a parent, but I think the teachers, but I think the biggest is giving them grace and latitude to make mistakes and to have some emotional outbursts that they might have, and remembering they're humans and they're not going to be perfect all the time.
Thank you. Here's a good one. What are some ways to respond to a teen who feels alone, isolated, and has mentioned suicide? The only thing they say that makes them happy is TV and online games, which has become the main cause of disagreements.
Yeah. The suicide and substance abuse rate has increased 30% since COVID started across our nation, across all age groups. And so that's a really pertinent conversation to have. Teenagers need to be active. Introverted teens may enjoy their online video games and watching videos and TikTok and whatever it might be, more than the extroverted teens. But you have to find ways for them to not feel so isolated and so alone. So, if you're a family that's very strict on no contact, no, always wearing face masks, not going out to events if it's not absolutely mandatory or needed, you may want to consider looking at that and talking to your physicians or your family members and seeing what would be appropriate or safe for me to let my kid do with other children. Letting them have interactions with people, particularly if they are more extroverted normally. Giving them an outlet, encouraging them to journal, write music. Music is a great outlet. Art, things like that. If they're not engaged with sports or things like that, that's more extroverted, then they may need a safe platform to express their feelings. And so music, art, things like that are very helpful platforms. But you can't give up on trying to have a conversation with them. It's okay to make your kid mad. It's okay to frustrate them and asking them if they're okay oftentimes. It's okay to do that because you're their parent. You have to be concerned with them. And that feeling of frustration with you will go away once they realize that you're there trying to support them. Suicide talk should always be taken seriously. It should not be minimized. Even if they seem like they're joking when they say it, you have to talk to them about the importance of understanding that feeling and getting them engaged in outside support. At that point, if they're talking about suicide, I would highly suggest that you get them engaged in therapeutic services, that you seek your primary care physician and talk to them about different options, whether that be medications, therapy, different outlets that they may suggest, and reaching out to those outlets that you have, teachers, your support systems, your church, because that's a very serious topic. And when it's brought up and talked about, that means that they're thinking about what that looks like. Maybe not doing it, but they're thinking about what that looks like, what it would feel like to be gone, if anyone would miss them. And so fostering a feeling of belonging, love, and acceptance. So what are they interested in? And join them in that. If your kid likes to sit and play video games, sit and play video games with them, right? I belong with you. I would rather not be anywhere else in the world right now than sitting here playing this video game with you, even if you can't stand the video game. Those are the things that will help them start to understand that you're their ally, that you're their team member, that they're loved, that they belong, and those are some suggestions, but definitely take that talk seriously.
Thank you. A parent asked, are there any good resources on how to help a child through this new trauma when they've already been struggling from another extremely traumatic event?
And that's where that complex trauma comes in. Again, we'd already, we read that stat that 54% of families and children have experienced a trauma. So we're already dealing with a pretty traumatized population. And so when we add on all of these societal shifts, changes, and traumas that we've been experiencing, that's what we call complex trauma. At that point, again, it really comes down to minimizing all of the things you don't have to do. Get down to brass tacks. Sit down with your spouse or your partner. If you're a single parent, sit down with your support system and say, what are my values as a family? What are the things that are most important to us? And what can we not worry about right now? You know, we don't need to worry about this and this because we can't do it anyway. It's not effective to worry about it. And really it doesn't match our values anyway. And so kind of looking and restructuring, kind of taking this big, huge world and trying to bring it in a little bit for this kid so that they can feel like the world around them isn't so big and that it's smaller, it's safe, they're secure in their home. If their home is not safe due to one parent or a situation or something like that, then the safe parent needs to take that into consideration and really try to get them to a place of safety. Because we can't deal with a lot of trauma if we're continuously in it, right? And I know that doesn't make a lot of sense when I'm saying deal with your trauma when we're still in COVID-19. But again, the things that I've suggested are more coping skills, things to deal with the trauma as we continue to experience it. Because COVID-19 is not going away. We are still learning what our new regulations are, and those change every day. And so we have to understand, what's important to us, minimize the things that aren't, have those conversations, and prioritize connection. Finding a way to connect with your kids through pets, activities, quiet time together, conversations, whatever you figure out that meets both of your needs. You got to try some things. You got to try different things before you find what really works a lot of times. I hope that helps.
Yes, and so far I don't have any other questions in the chat box. If you have other questions, please put them in the chat box. We have about 5 more minutes to answer questions.
And we can expand a little bit on several of the questions. And it sounds like a lot of the audience tonight is really concerned about their teens and their preteen age children, which makes a lot of sense. I think if we look at developmentally where they are normally, so like normal means pre-COVID, where kids, progress in their development, again, they're more peer related. So they're really preoccupied with image, trying on new hats. Who am I? What do my peers think of me? We also live in a society now where we take a picture and it's not so we have fond memories, it's so that we can post it on Facebook and get lots of likes. Those are the things that we've had to adapt to as parents. In our multi-generational families, our grandparents have no concept of why that stuff is important to teens, but it is. And so some of the ways that parents can get creative is using those platforms that kids are so engrossed in a way to interact with your kid. So that doesn't mean stalk them on Facebook and make comments on everything they post, because that's going to really turn them off. But it does mean that if you see a really cool let's say your kid's an artist and you see a really cool thing online that they can submit some work, and you want to do that with them, engage them in that way and say, oh, let's put this on Instagram, and if we get this many likes together, then we'll win this prize, or whatever it might be. There's those opportunities are out there all the time. But what you're doing is you're taking what's important to that kiddo developmentally right now, and you're implementing it into your own life. And that makes them feel really special and really important and really heard, and helps foster that growth and that connection with each other. So that's another idea. I know that multimedia and media is a huge thing. So as much as we can integrate that into our parenting in a healthy way, which is hard, but again, you have to do reading. You know, learning should never end. We should always be lifelong learners. And part of that for parents is learning all of these new trends, the new nuances, the new words, the new phrases that kids say, the new platforms they're on, and maybe trying to make it fun for everyone. You know, maybe having a family page on TikTok where you make funny videos, whatever it is that you agree with your ethics as a family and that you can get on board with, I think will help a kiddo of that age really feel connected to.
Great. So we are going to wrap up. I just want to share a few things that have come up in the chat box as far as the link that you can view this recording. And actually with Microsoft Live is what we're doing tonight. Once you have the link, you have the recording. So what you access today, whether you went to the website or you access the link via email, that link is now the recording. So that's kind of one of the cool tricks with all this technology. So it's available for you whenever. There's also been a question regarding if these slides will be available. And Jessica's graciously offered so that I can share that with you. That will probably be on the website, okay? I had to double check before I said that. We will post that on the website, and it may take about a day or so before that happens. If you would like them directly, you can certainly email me, Martha. I'll put it in the chat box, martha.henson at, let's see, I'm going to reply here and publish it. If you want to have it right away to look at, otherwise it will be on the website. We want to thank you so much for being here, and a special thank you to I'm sorry. We want to give a special thank you to Jessica Mars and her expertise and just her willingness to spend so much time in preparation, but also she practiced with us yesterday and came early tonight. So we certainly want to thank her for her time, and thank you guys for being here. In 2 weeks, we have our Parent Academy on concussions, symptoms, effects, and treatment. UC Health will also be presenting this Parent Academy with Dr. Nick Piantanita, Tanada, and Dr. Ian Tolberg. So thank you guys. Have a great day, and we'll see you next time.